has seen quite the rise in usability in recent times, so today I thought it'd be fun to evaluate his current meta position. My name is Juice and let's get into it. As always, we should start by discussing how he actually feels in his main best teams. For this particular video, I have 3 comps in mind that I'd like to look at. Firstly, Mualani Burn Vape, Kinich Burgeon, and then regular Thoma Burgeon. To start with Mualani teams, Thoma honestly feels rather excellent in them. He's a great replacement for Xiangling if your chef is already in use, or if you simply just don't want to use her. His power application most of the time is relatively stable, and you'll be able to vape all of the Shark Surfer's important hits. He also provides interruption resistance, which is nice as it keeps Mualani from getting knocked over. In fairness, she has high interruption res when riding her Shark already, but the more survivability, the merrier, I say. His shield also gets stronger with the more normal attacks that you do. The Shark Surfer specializes in those, so you'll be able to strengthen Thoma's shield to a rather solid degree. I'd say that the main thing you miss out on when using this guy over Xiangling is personal damage. The chef has some neat numbers to write home about. With that being said, that doesn't mean that Thoma has none. If you opt to build him on triple EM, then his own Burgeons actually aren't too shabby damage-wise. He's a very comfortable teammate. As for Kinich teams, he feels spectacular here too. He's also a Xiangling replacement. I do think that the Dendro dude plus the chef is one of Kinich's strongest synergies, but if you don't want to use Xiangling for whatever multitude of reasons, then Thoma will most certainly get the job done. His neat personal Burgeon damage still applies here. Plus, Kinich's normal attacks are even more frequent than Mualani's, so rest assured your shield will be very high quality. That's all fine and dandy, but the real question is, does Thoma's Pyrowap bode well with Kinich's long-range playstyle? Yeah, it works quite well. Typically speaking, it will be able to reach enemies and proc burning. However, Thoma is good for Kinich Burgeon specifically. If you're playing Burning, then it's a bit of a waste to use Thoma, both because he won't be proccing any Burgeons, which results in him having 0 personal damage, and because Xiangling's damage would benefit even more from having Bennett in the team to boost up her attack. Though that's not to say that he's bad in Burning. I do think that Xiangling is better there, but you can run 4-piece Deepwood memories on Thoma for Kinich's own damage numbers, and he also has a longer pyro uptime than the chef. He can also be used before Bennett, as Xiangling always wants to use her burst after Bennett for the sake of snapshotting. Then traditional Thoma Burgeon. It's really cool to see that this reaction is having more of a spotlight in Natlan, yet this team has always been around. Thoma obviously feels nice here. It's a team designed around its innate synergy with Burgeon. It works because of how Thoma can protect from the self-damaging cores, while also proccing his own Burgeons with his shield's pyro application. Build them on triple EM, and you've got yourself a real neat pyro trigger for the team. If you've got either of the 2 Natlan DPSs, I'd rather play their Burgeon teams instead because they're going to be a lot better than this. But if you have neither, aren't interested in either, yet still want to give Burgeon a shot, then this is a really nice taster team to test your opinions on it. As long as you're able to manage his energy economy, he feels quite good to play. Make sure to slap him on either a Katane or a Fav Spear, then you'll be good to go. He slots into these teams rather seamlessly, and he feels far from being a shoehorn. He acts as an excellent cheap alternative to play a unique type of team, while having excellently synergistic qualities to boot. It also helps that both of the Natlan DPSs that can make the most of him utilize normal attacks. There is also his C6, but since we've started talking about Constellations, why not delve in a little deeper? Thoma is a 4-star, so it's only natural that you may be led into thinking that he requires Constellations in order for him to perform at his best. Well, why don't we take a look and analyze so that we can decide this for ourselves. His C1 decreases the cooldown of his abilities. As you can imagine, this is excellent for all of his teams. It's also nice that this is down at C1, therefore being a pretty easy bit of QOL to pick up. Thoma's C2 increases the duration of his burst, which also really helps out his pyro application. These are excellent early constellations, and considering that this guy came out before Dendro, it makes me wonder if Hoyo knew that he'd be the Burgeon guy far in advance. His C3 upgrades his skill by +3. I haven't much to add here. Extra scalings are nice, but he isn't a crit-based DPS in the first place. His C4 reduces his ER requirements, which is a seriously big deal for him. You can then build more EM on him and lose a bit of your ER rolls, allowing his personal Burgeon damage to be a good chunk higher. Plus, it makes him a far more reliable solo pyro teammate in his main Burgeon teams. His C5 upgrades his burst shield by +3. I've pretty much got the same opinion on both his C3 and C5. Good, but not anything to write home about. The stronger shield is actually pretty good though, I won't undersell that. Then for Thoma C6. This con is quite the banger. 15% damage bonus for normal attacks and charge attacks for the protected character that's on field. This C6 is amazing for the two new Natlan DPSs because they both do plenty of normal attacks, especially for Mualani because the majority of her damage profile comes from her normals, whereas with Kenichi, his main damage share derives from his skill. It's a fantastic C6 that really benefits those specific teams. It's also nice for Ayato Burjin because Ayato's main damage source is getting buffed, aka his normal attacks. Thoma's Constellation lineup really improves him. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, unfortunately. This doesn't mean that he's bad at C0, he will still act as an excellent taster for Burjin teams, but the QOL within these constellations is undeniable. With that being said, please don't pull on a banner only for Thoma cons if you don't want the primary banner 5-star as well. You're just asking for trouble at that point. He is still worth your time at C0. Yes, C0 versus C6 is a night and day difference, but he's still ultimately gonna be one of your best bets for Burjin teams. I do encourage getting at least up to C2 for the improved Pyro app, but really, please don't feel pressured into pulling cons, don't let FOMO win. Thoma's meta history is very interesting, as he's one of those characters who literally went from 0 to hero. I started playing Genshin in 2.1 and he released in 2.2. Because I was so new at the time, I can't remember the exact feelings that everybody had towards him back then, but if I recall correctly, he was seen as pretty mid, albeit neat for Hu Tao teams if you ended up with C6, which checked out since Thoma was on our rerun banner at the time. That's actually how I got my first Hu Tao, there's a fun fact for you. 15% normal attack and charge attack damage bonus. Naturally pretty neat for the funeral director who primarily dealt in those, though we kind of fell into obscurity after some time with people preferring to run this particular team here. It's very hard to compete with 20% universal Registred, especially when Yolan provides ramping damage bonus herself. He continued to be a somewhat nothing unit for the rest of Inazuma. Nobody really paid the poor guy any mind because he had nothing extraordinarily interesting going on for him. There was little reason to use him as opposed to Zhongli, who was extremely valuable before Sumeru. He's still good now for the record, but I think that the Geo Archon had quite the rough patch during Sumeru. Point is, Thoma was replaceable. You had little reason to appoint him in particular unless you wanted your house cleaned or something. He didn't even synergize with Ayaka because she doesn't really play Melt until you get her later constellations. He worked with Ayato, however. Wow, now isn't that an accolade worth writing home about? Then Sumeru finally came out and saved the guy, he really needed it. Thoma didn't suddenly become the best character in the game or anything, plus I wouldn't say that he rose to the levels of Kuki Shinobu at the time, but he did definitely get better, because throughout the entire Sumeru patch, he remained as your best Pyro bet for Burjin teams. His meta position pretty much remained the same for the next 2 years, a good Pyro option for Burjin teams, throughout both Sumeru and Fontaine. Then we cut to current day, where Thoma really became decent. Natlan came out, and so too did Mualani. Then not long after, Kenichi followed. Both of these characters thrive with Pyrodendro-related reactions, therefore allowing the Housekeeper to finally get back to sweeping up enemies. Thoma was always good for Burjin. His issue was that there were no truly good DPSs that used that sort of archetype in particular. With these two out, there is now more reason than ever to level up your Thoma and give him a spin. He can also hold 4-piece Intercity, which is cool. He's not from Natlan, so you're only ever going to get a 12% damage bonus from him, but that's still quite a nice addition to your Kenichi or Mualani teams in particular. Though he would prefer to use 4-piece Deepwood and Kenichi teams if there isn't already another holder of it in the team. Natlan is pretty fresh. I wouldn't be surprised if Movu Ika killed him off, but the fact that he has in fact gained new valuable use cases and is a viable alternative to other Pyro options is absolutely true. Perhaps as more Natlan DPSs come out, he will gain even more use cases. Only time will tell, but let's not undersell his current achievements in the Natlan meta. With that being said, I don't think Thoma is ever going to be more worth using compared to Xiangling or eventually Movu Ika, but he doesn't have to be. Sometimes you need an alternative, for whatever reason that may be. Yeah, I know going, oh man, come on man, give him a chance, he'd be a great alternative, is pretty cringe most of the time because it sounds like huge cope. But to me, the difference between a cope alternative and an actual one is whether you can realistically see somebody wanting the qualities that said other choice provides. I can realistically see somebody wanting Thoma's comfort, C6 buffs, and nature as a replacement. Because let's remember, Xiangling and eventually Movu Ika are gonna be very contested units in other teams. The more choices, the merrier. Plus, let's remember that new players start with a roster of nothing, so somebody only beginning to play the game will really enjoy Thomas's presence. With that being said, I think he's become a really formidable 4-star in the current meta. Yes, he isn't on the levels of the oh-so-lofty Bennett, Xingqiu, Xiangling, Fischl and such, but he's still good at what he does. That's all he has to be in my opinion, as at base, every Genshin character should excel with at least one type of thing in particular, while actually benefiting their main teams. Thoma fulfills both of these qualities just fine. I was mostly intrigued when it came to Thoma because he's one of those units that went from being totally useless to being pretty good. I'd say he wasn't even that bad upon release. I found him to be a little underrated even, but it was a fair enough take that you had no real reason to pick him up if you already owned a Zhongli. His transition from bad to good felt like it happened over such a long period of time. Think about it. He was okay in Inazuma, then kind of fell off during Inazuma, then became solid in Sumeru, and then I think we can all safely call him a good unit now that he has 2 really solid use cases in Natlan teams, with both of the new 5-star characters. This all took place over a roughly 3-year period. I hope to see the guy continue to evolve over time. Thoma's a cool character, and if you've kept him on the bench for all of his time, then why not consider giving him a spin? Hopefully this video was able to update you on Thoma's current position in the Genshin Impact meta. This has been Juice, signing out, and I like to think that Thoma used to be Thomas, but then he pulled an Amy official moment and cut the S off to feel more Inazuman or something. Also, moving from Mondstadt to Inazuma, why would you do that when Mondstadt has Venti living there?